The first knock came at sunrise, sharp and furious, like the door itself had committed a crime. When I opened it, HOA Karen was standing there with a clipboard clutched to her chest, lips tight, eyes scanning my porch like she'd just discovered a national security threat. She didn't say good morning. She didn't say my name. She said, "You're in violation." And that was the moment I realized my quiet little hobby was about to turn into a full-blown war. It started with birds. Not noise, not trash, not damage, birds. I'd always loved feeding them. A few simple feeders, some seed, nothing crazy. The pigeons came first, then sparrows, doves, even a pair of bright cardinals that felt like good luck. Every morning, the porch felt alive. That peace lasted exactly 3 weeks. Karen claimed my excessive bird feeders were lowering property values, attracting pests, and creating an unregulated wildlife sanctuary. She slapped a notice on my door accusing me of violating Section 14, subsection C, paragraph something something of the HOA bylaws. The fine was ridiculous. The threat was worse. If I didn't remove every feeder, she would begin eviction proceedings. I laughed. I honestly thought it was a joke. I owned the house. I paid my dues. I'd never missed a payment or broken a rule. But Karen didn't laugh back. She leaned closer and whispered, "This neighborhood has standards." Over the next week, she escalated fast. Photos of my porch appeared in HOA emails labeled community concern. Neighbors stopped waving. One even apologized quietly for voting against me. Another slipped me a note saying, "Good luck, she got me last year." Then came the certified letter. Legal language, deadlines, words like non-compliance and forced removal. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not into rage, but into clarity. Karen thought she could scare me into silence. She thought birds were my weakness. She was wrong. If she wanted fewer birds, I decided she should have asked nicely, because if she wanted a war over pigeons, I was about to give her the most unforgettable flock this HOA had ever seen. That night, I sat on my porch watching the birds settle in, listening to wings flutter and coos echo softly in the dark. I realized this wasn't about seed or feeders anymore. It was about control, about one person deciding what joy was allowed to exist. Karen had chosen her hill to die on, and she had chosen the wrong neighbor. I didn't plan revenge out of spite. I planned it out of principle, patience, and a very specific understanding of how territorial pigeons can be. The calm before retaliation was almost peaceful, terrifying, and exciting for me. The next morning, Karen came back, this time with backup. 2 HOA board members stood behind her like nervous bodyguards, avoiding eye contact as she pointed dramatically at my porch. "See?" she said. "Still non-compliant." I counted silently. I'd removed exactly 1 feeder, out of 8. It was petty, intentional, and deeply satisfying. She handed me another notice, this one stamped in red, giving me 10 days before formal action. Eviction. The word wasn't subtle anymore. That afternoon, she walked the block with her clipboard, stopping neighbors, gesturing toward my house like it was contaminated. By sunset, I had officially become the problem resident. That's when I made the call. An old friend of mine ran a small bird rescue outside the city. We'd bonded years ago over photography and wildlife conservation. When I explained the situation, he went quiet, then laughed so hard I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "You're serious?" he asked. I told him I'd never been more serious in my life. He explained something Karen clearly didn't know. Pigeons are creatures of habit. If you feed them consistently in one place, they will return there every single morning, in large numbers, very large numbers. And once they claim a spot, good luck convincing them it's no longer home. The plan formed slowly, carefully. Nothing illegal, no harm, just birds doing what birds do. I spent the next week preparing while Karen grew more aggressive. She measured my porch with a tape measure. She photographed seed bags through my windows. She even tried to find me for a suspicious avian congregation. I wish I were joking. On day 9, she taped the final warning to my door. "Last chance," she wrote in thick black marker. "Remove all feeders or face consequences." That night, I removed every single one. My porch looked empty, bare, defeated. I wanted her to see it. I wanted her to feel victorious. Across the street, Karen stood watching from behind her blinds. I waved. She didn't wave back. At 4:45 a.m. the next morning, before the sun even considered rising, I drove out to the rescue with several large bags of premium seed and a borrowed van. We worked quietly, efficiently, like professionals. By the time dawn broke, 1,000 pigeons had learned exactly where breakfast would be served from now on. I drove home exhausted, heart pounding, hands shaking, not from fear but anticipation. I didn't sleep. I sat by my window, waiting. At precisely 6:02 a.m., the air changed. A distant sound, like wind, like rain, like something alive and massive approaching all at once. Karen's porch was about to become the most popular destination in the neighborhood. The first pigeon landed on Karen's porch railing like it owned the place. Then another, then 10 more. Within seconds, the sky above her house darkened, wings beating in perfect, chaotic rhythm. The sound wasn't loud at first, just a low, constant flutter, but it grew into something impossible to ignore. By the time Karen's porch disappeared under gray feathers, it sounded like a storm had chosen her address specifically. Her front door burst open. Karen stepped out in a silk robe, coffee mug in hand, ready to enjoy her victory lap. She froze. The mug slipped from her fingers and shattered on the porch, immediately buried under pigeons. Her scream cut through the morning like an alarm, sharp and panicked, echoing down the block. Neighbors poured out of their houses. Phones came out. Someone laughed. Someone else gasped. A few people clapped. The pigeons didn't care. They were busy eating, pacing, flapping, claiming every inch of her porch, roof, railings, and lawn furniture. This wasn't a visit. This was a settlement. Karen tried waving her arms. The pigeons ignored her. She tried yelling. They cooed back. She slammed the door and re-emerged with a broom, swinging wildly. But for every bird that lifted off, 2 more landed. Seeds scattered everywhere, and the pigeons followed it like destiny. By 7 a.m., her porch looked like a moving carpet of feathers. By 7:15, HOA board members were on the sidewalk, staring in disbelief. Karen shouted that this was harassment, sabotage, biological warfare. I stood across the street, sipping my coffee, perfectly calm. She stormed over, face red, hair wild, robe speckled with feathers. "This is your doing," she yelled. I smiled and pointed to my empty porch. "I removed all my feeders," I said. "I'm fully compliant." The pigeons kept coming. Every morning. Same time, same place. Karen hired pest control. They shrugged. She tried noise machines. The birds adapted. She covered her porch in netting. The pigeons sat on top of it like it was stadium seating. She called emergency HOA meetings. Attendance was record-breaking, mostly because everyone wanted updates. The fines against me vanished quietly. The eviction threats stopped. Emails labeled community concern mysteriously disappeared. Instead, new rules appeared about natural wildlife patterns and shared environmental responsibility. Karen stopped walking the block. Her blinds stayed shut. One morning, as the pigeons settled in, a neighbor left a small feeder on Karen's lawn. Another followed, then another. Nobody said a word. The birds decided this was the neighborhood now. Karen had tried to control nature with paperwork. Nature had voted back. And it voted in feathers, noise, and absolute persistence. By the second week, Karen looked like someone who hadn't slept since the previous decade. The pigeons had turned her mornings into ritual chaos. Every dawn brought the same shadowed sky, the same thunder of wings, the same relentless cooing that seeped through walls and windows. Her porch was no longer a porch. It was a landmark. Delivery drivers refused to approach it. Mail was left at the curb. Even squirrels avoided the area, as if they understood a territorial line had been drawn. Karen tried to regain control the only way she knew how: authority. She called a special HOA meeting and demanded mandatory attendance. The community room filled to capacity, not with anger, but with barely suppressed amusement. She stood at the front, clicking through photos of her porch like they were crime scene evidence. "This," she declared, is intentional harassment. Someone asked how pigeons could be harassment if no rules were broken. Another asked why wildlife was suddenly a problem when the bylaws encouraged natural landscaping. Karen's voice cracked as she answered. For the first time, the room didn't feel afraid of her. She announced new proposed fines for avian encouragement. The vote failed. Badly. Neighbors who had once stayed silent spoke up. One mentioned her rose bushes Karen forced her to remove. Another brought up the time Karen fined a veteran over a flag size. Story after story spilled out, and with everyone, Karen shrank further into her chair. Outside, the pigeons waited. Karen escalated again, this time calling the city. Animal control arrived early one morning, assessed the situation, and wrote a report. The birds weren't aggressive, they weren't diseased, they weren't being harmed, they were simply eating, on private property. The officer shrugged and suggested a professional cleaning service. That afternoon, a cleaning crew showed up. Power washers roared, feathers flew, seed washed away. Karen stood supervising like a general reclaiming lost ground. For the first time in days, her porch was visible. The next morning, the pigeons returned. They landed on the wet wood, unbothered, unimpressed. By noon, it was worse than before. Karen screamed into her phone, pacing, slipping on feathers, unraveling in front of half the block. Nobody helped. Nobody complained. Some people filmed. A quiet shift had happened. The neighborhood no longer revolved around Karen's rules. It revolved around her reaction to losing control, and every flap of wings reminded her she couldn't bully nature, neighbors, or reality forever. That evening, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. Please make it stop. No signature. I folded it carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and set it on my table. The pigeons cooed softly outside, like they already knew how this story would end. The next morning, I didn't change a thing. No feeders on my porch, no calls made, no instructions given. The pigeons arrived as always, right on time, wings slicing through the air like clockwork. Karen's porch filled again, but something was different. The screaming didn't come. The door didn't slam. The broom stayed inside. Around 9 a.m., Karen walked over to my house. No clipboard, no robe, no audience. She looked smaller somehow, like the fight had finally drained out of her. She stood on my walkway, careful not to step onto the porch, and cleared her throat. I withdrew the complaint, she said. Not an apology, just a statement. The fines are gone. The eviction notice is void. The board agrees this. Escalated unnecessarily. I nodded. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I let silence do the work she used to weaponize. She hesitated, then added, If the birds stop coming, I'll resign from enforcement. That one surprised me. Not because it was generous, but because it was desperate. I told her the truth. I said I never controlled the pigeons. I never released them on her porch directly. I simply fed birds elsewhere, legally, humanely, and consistently. Nature did the rest. I reminded her that control is an illusion, especially when you try to impose it on others. Karen listened. For the first time, she actually listened. That afternoon, she submitted her resignation. By evening, it was official. A new interim board took over, quietly undoing years of petty rules and selective enforcement. Neighbors waved again, people sat on their porches, feeders reappeared, not just at my place, but everywhere. Within a week, the pigeons slowly dispersed, not gone, just balanced. They still visited Karen's porch occasionally, but not in force. The neighborhood returned to something softer, lighter, human again. Karen stopped hiding behind blinds. She sold her house 3 months later. No drama, no farewell email. On my porch, I put one feeder back, just one. The birds returned gently, like guests, not an army. Sometimes I think about how close I came to backing down, to letting paperwork crush something harmless and joyful. I'm glad I didn't. Because this was never really about pigeons. It was about standing your ground without becoming cruel, about choosing patience over fear, about reminding someone who forgot that power only exists if everyone agrees to give it to you. And every morning, when I hear wings flutter softly outside, I remember exactly why I stood firm.